This may be one of the goofiest things I've ever done in my life, but I'm here, so. I have some blood kin who came to Butte around 1905, and they came as young women and men, and they went on to live what I think are remarkable lives. So if you just read this, when I think of it, and I think of the thousands of Irish that immigrated from Ireland to come to Butte, there are really only 4 people and their children that I'm talking about. I always connect the Allihies copper mine and its demise to the discovery of the Alice mine in Butte. Don't do this. Okay, so here are my details. So I grew up in Butte, Montana. I was born February 10, 1943. I lived at 211 West Quartz, that's just up the road from here. The corner of Quartz and what I always called the Idaho Hill, because it was like this. I had some really great friendships here when I was here. Went to college at Gonzaga, graduated in '61, went to, I was lucky, I got a fellowship to go to graduate school, and oh, hey.
You all right?
The answer is yes. So I went to graduate school in St. Louis at Washington University. Ended up getting a PhD in psychology at Washington U. Met my bride, who's Evelyn, raise your hand. My bride, Nancy Everett. We got married on Halloween Day, 1972, so we're together for a few years over. On October 31, it'll be 53 years. We have one son who's Neil, and he was born on Bastille Day, 1984. Now, this presentation really took a long time to put together. And I think of it as starting in 2016, when I don't remember how I got there, but I got on the website of the Irish Studies program at Missoula, Montana University. And there I found that people there in that department had kind of pointed out that Sarsfield O Sullivan was an important historical figure in the settling of Irish in Butte. And there's a woman in the back of the room, and I'd like her to raise her hand, if you would. Ms. Ryan, beautiful Irish lass, with a lovely baby. And she's originally a graduate student at University College Cork, went to Montana University, and ended up getting a PhD with a doctoral dissertation beyond the work and Sarsfield O Sullivan. And I'm really happy that she's here. You're gonna be surprised how much your name and your words show up in this presentation, okay? I basically have stolen from you. Another important figure in my life was a woman named Carol Shea Barber, who was a first cousin of mine. She's about a decade older than I, and so we are both grandchildren of Bridget Murphy Shea, and you'll see a little more here. Along the way, Carol wrote a biography of Bridget, and she calls it, and it really is in quotes, the short biography of Bridget Murphy Shea. And you'll see here in the work that she's done in this presentation. The other thing, you can read that next paragraph. And then finally, many of you know of the work of Tracy Thornton, the Montana Standard, and Ellen Crane has done remarkable work for this building, in this building, and I certainly have relied on her work. Long time ago, Butte, Montana, and what people have come to call Uptown really was the center of my life. My house was a block north of the famous Copper King Mansion. Every day I walked past the mansion, up and down, backward and forward, to these buildings. So, upper right-hand corner, I actually went to a couple of years of grade school in the building that you see there that was built originally in 1889. Now, the reason I even remember that, okay, was that, probably because it was a law, they built a fire escape from the third floor, second floor, the first floor. And there was one of those metal, kind of curly-Q fire escapes. You know, and I was a third and fourth grader, fifth grader, and that was a blast to go down that fire escape. I mean, that's the one memory I have there. Went to St. Patrick's grade school, happily went to Boys Central, had a great time in Boys Central. There's a picture of a that was in the paper when we had probably a Thanksgiving make-together baskets to give to whoever. And then there are two sets of people that were wonderful to have in my life. The first were the women who were in the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth. Wonderful teaching order. For me, they provided, I don't even think of them as teachers. I think of this as a kind of a warm spot around these lovely women. I actually had a long-term crush on Sister Matthew Marie. And I actually followed her in my head for years, and in the 1970s, I was teaching in St. Louis at a university, and along comes a graduate student who was an African-American nun, who was a member of the Order of the Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth. And I said, is there any chance that you know a woman whose name is Sister Matthew Marie? And she said, she's been the most important person in my life. I mean, it was like goosebumps. I'm actually feeling the goosebumps now. And I somehow got attached for a phone number. I called her. By then, she had left, like a lot of women did in those days. She had left the order. I don't remember what she was doing. But I just had a wonderful conversation with her. To think that that happened all those years later. Then the other important teachers and mentors and for me were the Christian Brothers of Ireland, who had been in Butte for decades at the time. If you look there were two brothers, Mahoney and Maloney, who were from Butte. Brothers Curtin Dwyer, who we called Dippy Dwyer, and E.T. Byer, who were from New York. Brother Frank was the principal, and I just remember their Bob. I don't know if you still call it pop. You still call
Yeah.
bottle of pop cost 14 cents. Brother Byer, I found out when I've been doing this research, it looks like he wrote a master's degree on the history of the Christian Brothers in Butte. Brother Byer was my algebra teacher. He also was the coach for the freshman basketball team. Now I'm going to tell you a weird story. The message is you never know ahead of time what something is going to mean for you. We were practicing, we were having tryouts in the old KC gym, basketball gym, what was under the running track in those days. And Brother Byer screamed, since he saw my lack of coordination, he said, "Shea, are you sure you never had polio?" True, okay. And what happened was that he okay? I ended up being cut for the team. I, as an only child, I had enjoyed being around these guys. I asked him if I could be the manager. And he said, "Yeah, Dennis, but if you're gonna do it, you're gonna do it the right way." And he had me read a book. The Kramer Company had put out a book on athletic training for students. I learned how to tape ankles and ended up doing that for the rest of my high school career. And because of that, I went to Gonzaga University and had a full scholarship, tuition, room, and board to be the athletic trainer for Gonzaga.
Wow.
And as such, I've been a Gonzaga nut ever since. Now, there are a couple of names that are in the next column. When I was a kid, there was a grocery store called the Courthouse Grocery, and then around the corner from North Montana was what was in those days called the Dugan Merrill Mortuary. The band that ran the mortuary was George, do you remember George Parrott? You're mouthing it, you're reading my words. And George was one of the assistant or the volunteer trainers for Boys Central. So he was one of my mentors there. The other one was a man whose name was Francis X. Dolan. He was the equivalent undertaker at what then was called Daly Shea, had nothing to do with me. Daly Shea Mortuary. His son was Denny Dolan, and so there was a time when it was Dugan Dolan, is that what it was called in those days? Anyway, and then, I'll talk about this later, I worked for 6 summers as a laborer at Holy Cross Cemetery. Here's some photos. On the left side, you see Nancy Everett with me, different stages. The next column really revolves around our son Neil and when he was young. And then at the bottom, Neil with the beard is with his baby, Ethan. Some pictures of my mother, baby Neil, my Uncle Louie. And then this next picture was, so I'm half Irish and half Italian. So we were fortunate enough to travel to Italy a few times. We were once in a town called Peralta, and I don't remember why, but I bought a couple of what in those days were called beaters, short sleeve, white shirts. And in the conversation with Neil, we were joking about being in shape. And we were talking about him having a six-pack. I said to Neil, do I have a six-pack? Neil said, Dad, you don't have a six-pack, you have a keg. Yes, he has some pictures of me as a, all right. Because of my connection with my grandparents, I was able to become a dual citizen of Ireland, I am, and I hold an Irish passport. Now, Carol Shea, Barbara, my cousin, wrote this biography, and I'd just like you to read that. Father Sarsfield O Sullivan was very close to her and really was a grandnephew of Bridget Shea. And then in the box, I think it's really important that Bridget's ability to read and write and speak in both Irish and English really gave her an advantage in that she could talk to anybody. And once her life got going, that ability, along with her personality, made her a very formidable person. So you see that she and her husband got married initially. They lived near the Sacred Heart Church, ended up moving to 211 West Court Street and were members, as our family was, of St. Patrick's Church. If you look there are pictures of these different churches. And if you look at the memberships, if you just think of the number of Irish that were in, and Irish Catholics obviously, that were in Butte before the war, there's just a number of 1916. You can see that. Is anybody old enough to remember Holy Savior Church? Do you? Yeah. Yeah. All right. This is a photo of the Irish militia in Butte. My grandfather, James O'Shea, and a friend of his from Ireland named Phil Sullivan. Phil Sullivan must have known Bridget, my dad, for decades. He looked to me like he was about 50 in those days, and he always came up to the house to have dinner and to BS with my grandmother and my dad. And in the 50s, he was still working in the mines, and you remember these things. I remember every once in a while he'd give me a silver dollar. So this is my grandfather, born near Ardgoon in Ireland. You can just read that. My grandfather actually brought a shillelagh from Ireland. And I don't know if you remember the old song, the same old shillelagh my parents, my grandfather brought from Ireland. Those are the lyrics there. You don't need me to tell you this. Mike Mansfield, when I was in the 1960s, Mike Mansfield was the senator from Montana and the Senate majority leader in Congress. And he is the man that when Lyndon Johnson was working to get through what in those days was called the Great Society program. It was Mike Mansfield that made sure that it worked. And you can see that, of course, Marcus Daly is an important character in Butte history, and you can see that. The other thing that is burnt into my memory is that I was in college at Gonzaga in November of 1963 when JFK was assassinated. And what most people wouldn't know, and I only know it because I'm an obsessive compulsive, he wrote this beautiful eulogy at JFK's funeral. I've been to Ireland 4 times, If you look on the left, you see a photo of the Bridget Shea and James Shea children. Bridget, James, my Aunt Eileen, my Uncle Emmett, my Dad Neil. The oldest brother was Jim, and Jim went to the seminary, became ordained, and was a chaplain in World War II. And it was, I don't know if there was a thing called PTSD in those days, but he saw so much nasty stuff that he just, when I remember him, he was just kind of emotionally flat. Anyway, so we've been, my cousin Carol Shea Barber went in '89, met relatives in '98, Nancy and my son went, and we ended up meeting up with this Anthony Lehane, who was a shirt-tail relative. Then in 2016, Nancy and I and an old friend of ours went on a trip, ended up going to Donegal, and then 2022, we had another great trip, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. Pictures on the right would sit right over, I mean, the pictures sit right over my computer. My father, graduation program. My son is a 40-year-old pulmonologist / critical care physician. And when COVID hit, you remember when it hit. Nobody knew anything in those days. I'll never forget that he and another doctor had 24 COVID patients in their ICU, and they all died. And that was what it was like at the beginning. It scared the hell out of him. He's afraid he's going to catch it and bring it home to his wife. I mean, it was just, everybody remembers that. Some of you may have lost people. Now, this was the beginning of this presentation. In 2016, I discovered all of this material on the website. It's actually still there if you're goofy enough to try to find it. The website of the Irish Studies program at Zula. Do you remember giving that talk in Boston?
I certainly do.
I bet you do. Yeah. Is Terry still the chair there in Missoula?
Yes, he is. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
I mean, I know because I'm on Facebook.
Yeah.
I know that his wife calls him, or people call him Terry. His wife is brilliant. She is wonderful. And she posts a lot on Facebook. And she, I mean, you know that. She just is a wonderful person. So SARS has sent, over the years, sent me different kinds of stuff. On the left is a detailed line drawing family history of the Murphys and the Sheas. On the right is another printed version of genealogists. We'll see more about genealogy in a little while. So my grandmother, Bridget Murphy Shea, had a niece who was Josie Murphy O Sullivan. And you can see the connections for the relatives. On the left, if you've ever tried to do a location of relatives on the Valera Peninsula, you see that there are these little tiny districts that are 2 or 3 miles away from each other. One of them was inches. I remember seeing that. So if you've been to Ireland, or if you haven't, Carrick-Keep Upper in the day was farmland. Aries is both a village and a parish. Innisfarnard is an island off Kilcatherine Point. Innisfarnard is where Sean O'Sullivan was born. Where my grandfather was born in Ardgroom. Castletown, Bearhaven was a thriving port and hotbed for O'Sullivans. And you can just read the rest of that. So what happened, as those of you who know Irish history, is that the world changed for Irish and the English in the years from 1916 to 1923, with all the conflicts that went on, all the changes that went on. And really it was the beginning of the Irish Republic. I don't know if you've ever been to Ireland and been to Clonakilty. There's a wonderful Michael Collins Museum there that if you get a chance is worth seeing. So you can read this that I stole from you somehow. I really don't remember. I just found it and used it. Is that the right title of your dissertation?
What title do you have?
But, Irish in Montana, 1880 to 1920, cultural nationalism in exile.
Exactly, yep, that's it.
Good, good. And your book, is it printed?
It's not printed, so I've been working on a different project for the
Oh,
last
really?
years. But I'm now working back on that.
What
So,
project have you been working on?
on a different immigrant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was a German immigrant.
Oh, good.
And that was really fascinating, but now I'm back to focusing on Sean again, so
All
I'm
right.
excited about that.
Brilliant woman. In more ways than one. Now, I think you can read. Can you read that? Is it readable?
No.
Oh. All right, so here. During and after the conflicts in Ireland, Sean's home was open to many prominent visitors in the following years. Among others, he received Countess Markowitz, an Irish nationalism, who was involved in the Easter Uprising in 1963. Mrs. Pierce, the sister of Patrick Henry Pierce, who was one of the leaders of the Easter Uprising. He was one of the people that was sentenced to death. Mrs. Thomas Clark, widow of Thomas James Clark, one of the organizers of the Easter Uprising, Father Michael O'Flanagan, a Catholic priest, Republican, and a member of Sean Fain Party. Hannah Sheely Skeffington was a suffragette and an Irish nationalist. Frank Eichen, an Irish politician. Deanna Fall, deputy minister, a longtime minister. And Robert Galvin, the founder of the Missionary Society of St. Columba. So in this photo, Father Eamon Valera O Sullivan and his father, Sean O Sullivan. You can see a photo of Sean O Sullivan, and below the photos of Eamon and Sars. I remember that when I was in Butte, I was at the time of what you're going to see there. I was very young. I don't know that I could have been 3 or 4 or 5 for all I know. The memory I have is being at the house on Wyoming Street with Sean and his bride and my grandma and my dad. And Sean was trying to give me something to keep me busy. So he handed me a wad of pencils. And he said, "Dennis, why don't you go sharpen these?" So I did as I was told. I went and sharpened these things, brought them back to him, and I'll be damned if he didn't break the tips off again and told me to go do it again. At the bottom it reads, in 2008, Dan McCarthy, writing for the Irish Examiner, having heard of Kayla Ryan's work, heard of a draft of a letter that Sean had written to a friend. In the letter, Sean accuses the British of leaving Ireland without a language or freedom. He also lamented that Ireland left him and hundreds of others without an education. As a result, he always lacked confidence in his writing abilities and was frustrated in his inability to accurately express his thoughts and feelings. And then she says, the people of Innisfarnar were amazing. It was quite an insular community. All were Irish speakers and they subsisted of fishing. I think it's really important to remember that at that time, historically, the British had prohibited the natives in Ireland from speaking their language, okay? And that was just part of it. They also, of course, kept them out of Catholic churches. So when all of the Easter Rising and all of the things happened, a thing that they held on to was the ability to speak Gaelic or the Irish language. It was a huge thing to give an identity to these Irish. Now, have you seen the Wikipedia article, Kara?
I haven't, no.
You haven't?
No,
Well, there is a Wikipedia long listing that is called, if you Google it, you look up Irish language outside Ireland. And there is, I'm not going to read all of this to you. I'm just going to read one, I'll just read the first couple of sentences. One of the most talented 20th century Irish language poets and folklore collections in the New World was Sean, in Irish Gaelic, Sullivan, Sean Irish O'Sullivan. O'Sullivan, who literary scholar Kayla Ryan has dubbed Butte's Irish Bard, was born into the Irish fishing community upon Innisfarnar, etc., etc. So Sean, when he came from the island of Innisfarnar, was illiterate, couldn't read or write, spoke Irish, didn't know English, and a big part of what he did was to learn for the first time how to read and write in Irish, and he also, of course, did it in English. And there's a language, there's a cultural organization that promotes the Irish language in Ireland and worldwide. The organization was founded in 1893 with Douglas Hyde as its first president. So what I've done is cut and pasted this slide and the following slide. Now, when I read this, I made an assumption that you had provided the stuff to Wikipedia. I have no idea how Wikipedia things go on. I wouldn't be surprised if they stole your own work. Whether,
They got it from, we published in 2020 a collection of essays on North American Gales.
okay,
And North American Gales, and I contributed a paper to that publication about John. And
Alright.
it looks to me like that's a lot of it.
For sure.
oh, good.
And so you can actually read that book, the collection of essays, the archives have a copy of it here.
Oh, good.
But it looks to me like that's what it's from. Because I just.
All right, whatever. At least we now know that.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting slide. Somewhere along the way, I found, I don't know how the hell I found it, but I found this photo when Eamon de Valera was in Butte. There are a bunch of photos, if you look, of de Valera and this group of people that included the judge and included some doctors. In the upper right corner is a man in a black cassock, and his name is Father M.M. English. Has anyone in here ever heard of Monsignor English?
Yes.
All right, so, yeah, go ahead. Father, Son, Holy Ghost, please. So, when I was in St. Patrick's grade school, Monsignor English came to the grade school, to all the classes, handed out report cards. That was part of what he did. Then, there are some things that I found looking at him. Upper right-hand corner, Monsignor English was instrumental in the installation of sewers from Pine Street to Floral Boulevard on the flat in the 1930s, and he constructed a rectory at St. Anne's. Any of you belong to St. Anne's Parish? Well, so I didn't, well, anyway, and then in 42, he was transferred to St. Patrick's. He chaired the drive to construct what was then Girls Central High School. I just went by that building in the last couple of days. It's now just called Central Catholic High School. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's all boys and girls high school now.
Yeah, okay.
It's co-ed.
All right. So he also, you know, he always was a builder. He was always doing something. You okay?
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
I don't, does anybody know whether anybody has written a biography of him? I mean, he was a big shot in Butte he died in 67, but you know, he's an Irish immigrant. He was a mover and a shaker. I mean, he was, there were people that called him Big Mike. And they did that because they were afraid of him. I mean, he was a really powerful guy. September the 18th, 1919 was the 100th anniversary of Eamon de Valera's visit to Butte. And I'm not going to go through all the details of the St. Patrick's Cemetery. Then here's on the far left, Father Sarsfield O Sullivan, Irish-American priest, Butte, Montana, St. Patrick's Cemetery, Butte, Montana. And there are these pictures in the Library of Congress of Sars, and then many of the tombstones, are just a sample of them. I mean, there's a carload of tombstones of St. Patrick's. And then there is a 2-page letter that Sars and Bernie wrote me when I had my first bout of cancer. And it starts out that he said, Carol told me about your sickness. And then Bernie and I remembering you each day, please God that all will go well. On the right side, I highlighted, throughout the penal days, please God, someday we will get together at the Mass Rock near the house and bridge, near the house and bridge was born in. Does that make sense? You're looking kind of quizzical. Just look, you wondering something?
Where were the Mass Rock by my house?
We're trying to,
Trying to figure that one out.
Well, that's not, because she was born in Carrickeen
Never
Upper.
mind, born in, gotcha, okay.
Yeah, all right,
My bad.
all right.
Is there a Mass Rock by my house?
Now, I'm sure you came here because you wanted to know about my life as a 7th and 8th grader. In 56 and 57, I hung out with a group of boys in an area that in those days was called the Hub Edition. That's what we called it. It's near what today is called Cherokee Park. And it's kind of down the hill. If the Anselmo was here, there was a Little League baseball field here. And Quartz and Copper come down the hill. There was a vacant lot, okay? And that was our playground, okay? Now, in the day, there was the prequel, I guess I might call it, to Evel Knievel, and his name was Joey Chitwood. Joey Chitwood was one of these auto daredevil guys, and my friend Ricky and Garcia and I and a couple of our buddies went to the old Naranchi Stadium to watch he and his crew race around, and there were cars that were stacked up, and like Evel did over the years, fly over these cars, and that was the show. Well, Ricky got an idea, and what happened is that at the place where there was this vacant lot, in an effort to build this vacant lot that was filled with rot up, the city had dumped dirt, good dirt in different parts on this playground. So by the time the kids had played on this, where you're sitting, there would be a pile, and where you're sitting, pile, where you're sitting, a pile. They were all over the place. Well, Ricky, having watched Joey Chitwood, decided he was going to ride his bike and do what Joey Chitwood did. So he got up on Copper Street, which came down. Coming down, boom, approached this hill. I mean, it was only 3 feet high. Approached this hill, okay. When he went over this hill, his bike wheels were this high off the ground. And thanks be to God, he didn't break his neck. He tipped over, came down, dislocated his shoulder, and he said, "Did you see that?" Well, there were these 4 guys, including Eddie Panisco, whose father had been a clown in the Ringling Brothers, and he was known as Frank Panisco. And Frank and his wife opened a set of, I think of it as circus games, in the Columbia Gardens on the arcade. Do you remember that? You're nodding, so you remember that. Well, he hired our gang to work in those games, giving tickets and putting things back and loading up the plastic goldfish. And they paid us meal money and a couple of dollars in coins for working there. You know, we were only 11 or 12 years old, and so the best thing about it is that we got to ride the roller coaster for free. I don't know, I must have ridden that roller coaster 50 times. Anyway, that was that time. Now, what I'm about to tell you is it's going to end up being a longer story. So Ricky, when we were doing this, Ricky was a student at St. Mary's grade school. At St. Mary's, there were 2 brothers, Mickey and Connie Dennehy. Now, is anybody in here a Dennehy or related to the Dennehy's? Well, anyway, Mickey and Connie were these, I think of them as being like spark plugs. I mean, they were, I don't know, 5'8" or so and 160 pounds. And they were always fighting as brothers, but I mean, they were duking it out. And Ricky said that if they weren't fighting each other, they'd find some other guys to fight with. Now again, you know, we're talking about kids, all right? Ricky claimed that the Dennehy's mother was the toughest woman in Dublin Gulch. Our senior year, we went someplace to, it was in January, there was snow on the ground. We were gonna have all boys in our class. Mickey and Connie were there. And we've had sleds and tobaccos, and when we got out of the car, one of the parents had one of those station wagons that was seemed to my eye, about 40 feet long. I mean, it was just this huge station wagon. And they had a bunch of toboggans and sleds that were in it, and they opened it up and were unloading it. And whoever owned the car had left a 30-06 in the car. Okay? So as things would happen, one of the 2 of them, I don't know which one, went into the back of the station wagon, pulled out this 30-06, and started around. I mean, he didn't have any bullets in it. And one of them said to the other one, "Mickey, you fat fucking fruitless bastard, put that gun down or I'll tell Mommy." Memories. Now, does anybody out here know or knew Eddie or Edwin Dobb, D-O-B-B? Anybody? You did, sir? How'd you know him?
School.
Oh, yeah? He passed away in whatever year, I don't know, but I'd never heard of him. So what's going to follow is the following. You can hear me show you a couple of different letters that are important to this. There have been a bunch of documentaries about Butte over the years. One of them came out in 2008 called Butte, America, something about a hard rock miners or something like that. And Edwin Dobb was one of the leaders, one of the writers in that program. So here is the, I'll read this letter to you. From Edwin Dobb, 2007. I'll close on a personal note. A ramble concerning land blood ties and the strong links between Butte and Ireland. When I was a boy, I spent a lot of time with my older cousins, Mick and Con Dennehy, whose mother was a Doherty, the biggest and most influential clan on that side of the family. The Dennehys lived just below the O'Sullivans on Wyoming Street, across from St. Mary's and the Stewart Mine, which was one of our playgrounds. Okay. Good, all right. Which is one of our playgrounds, just as the pikes and fields of mine waste were. Sars and Eamon O'Sullivan's father came from Inishfarnard, now an uninhabited island. Visit from the old cemetery of Catherine, way out on the Barra Peninsula. Sean was an Irish patriarch and a Republican through and through. He started the first Gaelic language school here early in the 20th century. His greatest gifts to his sons, both of whom became priests, was his love of language, especially the spoken word. According to Sars, when Sean performed a task for a neighbor on the lonely windswept isle of his birth, instead of asking for a piece of candy or other treat, he requested a song or a poem. His brother Eamon, who died young, could have been a first-rate poet had he not pledged allegiance to the church. What's going on?
They're not working.
Okay. All of it was mixed together here. Catholicism, nationalism, clannishness, a tragic sensibility, the cause of ordinary people, including the miners and their families, as they tried to hold their own in the face of unbridled capitalism. When Sars was a kid, in that house next to my cousins, he was witness to many things that you might not expect in such an out-of-the-way place, including the arrival of none other than James Connolly, Eamon de Valera, who returned to Butte after he became president, and James Larkin, all sitting around the kitchen table with Sean, debating the fate of Ireland. Connolly and Larkin gave impassioned speeches at Finlander Hall, the Hibernians deciding that the two firebrands were too controversial. They addressed not only the Irish and Irish Americans, miners, but socialists, anarchists, and wobblies, of which there were many. The message that the cause of Ireland and the cause of working people were one and the same. Butte was so thoroughly Irish that the Civil War and partitioning split neighborhoods, friends, and families, and some of the enmity survives to this day. Indeed, won't die until those that live through it do. I've gone on too long, as I often do. Cheers, Edwin Dobb. Then we have it. How do you pronounce it? Ribard or Choir?
I think so, yeah.
All right. I don't know if you've ever seen one of his volumes of the Annals of Valera. Raise your hand if you've seen it. All right. So volume 2 covers the parish of Eries. Roberto Dwyer holds a place of distinction in Ireland and modern Irish history. In the box to the right, he chronicled the immigration of the Valera Peninsula so wonderfully, said Ellen Crane, director of the Butte-Silver Archives. Can you read that or not?
No.
All right. Still.
Okay, but it's font's too small.
I probably should bring it closer. All right, so this came from Roberto Dwyer, a fabulous books of poems of the late Eamon de Valera O Sullivan of Butte, Montana, arrived here thanks to his brother, Father Sarsfield O Sullivan of Butte, Montana, USA, are books of the poetry of his late brother, Father Eamon de Valera O Sullivan of Butte, and the translations by Father Eamon of some poems in Gaelic by his father, the late John Irish O Sullivan of Butte, originally from the island of Inishfarnay. My wife Joan, a second cousin to Father Sarsfield and Father Eamon, and I had the privilege of staying with Father Sars and Bernie on a trip to Butte in 1994, when I was assisting on the making of the film documentary From Valera to Butte, which was based on my research work on the emigration of the Valera copper miners and a lot of their families to the copper mines of Butte over many years gone by. Father Sars took part in the documentary. Unfortunately, Father Eamon was dead by then. One would be inclined to stay up all night in awe of the brilliant Father Sars, Bernie, parentheses, since passed to eternal reward, God be good to her, going through Irish history, Butte history, and the history of the people of many years. And the pictures are of Eamon and Bernie. This long paragraph talks about a variety of paintings that Eamon did over the years. I know we're running long, and this is a poem that Eamon wrote. No man tonight, my father, mourned you there in Ishfarnard with nets and Chapel Cove, wakes to no sound The hide is bare of living man, great music, and of love, no comely woman. On this night will stand no man to night. My father mourns you there. The restless gull calls on their height unheard. The Arctic salmon shattering the air recalls you exile. Briefer than a word of grave and gentle. There was your span, a grave Lord, aren't you there, O island of man? All right. This is a episode 15 of the Verticus Project, Bridget Shea. The woman behind this woman, raise your hand, Cindy. Cindy Shaw now lives in 211 West Courts, and she's lived there
Almost 30 years.
for over 30 years. Cindy Shaw has been the owner of 211 Court Street since 1996. On December 9, 2020, Cindy was interviewed for the project. That project is devoted to maintain historical records of women who made contributions to the Women's Protective Union. In this, the last installment of Oral Histories of Butte Women's Protective Union, we depart from our usual format. While the voices of its members belong to life remarkable accomplished of the organization to which they were dedicated, over and over we heard members recall the words and actions of Bridget Shea, who served as president and walking delegate for the union for 25 years. She was both feared and revered. Unfortunately, she died in 1955 at age 79. What does remain, however, is a residence where she lived for 37 years. The city of Butte boasts one of the largest national registered districts in the country and the most national registered designated buildings in Montana. Bridget's house is among them. Cindy Shaw is a member of the Butte-Silver Bowl Council of Commissioners and a prominent community leader. She's lived in the former Shea home since 1996. A historian herself, Shaw has researched the house's legacy and has even spoken to Bridget's relatives. She considers herself a custodian of the house's legacy. Cindy Shaw speaking. So when I bought this house, I had no idea what history was. I feel like a steward of the house. The brick workman's cottage sits on West 4th Street, high above the Summit Valley floor. It's original varnish, woodwork and French hardwood floors. So the house was built in 1985, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I have a long thing of, when I lived in that house, we were surrounded by the Carney, C-A-R-N-E-Y.
That'd be this girl.
What?
I'm a CAR anyway.
Really?
205 West Courts.
Really?
Yes.
You related to the people that lived
Yes,
there? Really?
yes.
Martin Prince.
And the house right next to yours was my uncle Martin Francis Carney. And then we live right next to the Methodist church.
In the old house, in the big house,
Home.
the big home, the family home.
Yes.
Wow. Who would have thought? So Martin Carney and his wife Peg, and the daughters Martha and Peggy lived next door. And the thing I remember was the house at one time had been finished with stucco and wire, but it had never been finished, right? So, across the street on Quartz in Idaho, there was another stucco house that was painted pink. Next to Martin's house and between the family home, was a Mr. Warren had owned this huge wooden rooming house that I thought, I mean, if you looked at it, it looked like a fire trap. I mean, that's what. And next to it was the house you lived in. In that house, well, one of the sons was Willie Carney, who was a Jesuit at Gonzaga. And there were other, Joan, who was a bartender. Anyway, all of those houses are now gone. I'm happy that you're here. Thank you so much. In the day, catty corners from 211 West Quartz was the Lydon house. Kate and Alice Lydon lived there, old friends of my grandmother's. George Perry would take the Lydons and my grandmothers to Mass at St. Patrick's, and he would drive them to and fro, especially in the winter. Now I'm going to tell you a story. I'm not going to read it. This is an abbreviated version of what Cindy wrote. So my grandfather James was a teamster, and he drove a wagon, horse-drawn wagon, delivering beer for the Butte Brewing Company. And one day, he decided to stop for a beer himself. And evidently he stopped at an O Sullivan saloon on North Main. And remember, he was part of the militia in those days. And he went in, and there was a man who was drunk, and he was Cornish. And he was mouthing off and calling the Irish nasty names, right? So what does my grandfather do? Like any normal person, he goes home, puts on his militia uniform, comes back, goes into the saloon, walks up to this Godfrey guy, and he points to his uniform, and he said, "What the hell? You're talking about the Irish, I'm Irish, and you're full of whatever," he said. Well, they get into a tussle, boom, 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 and my grandfather had a 3-inch knife. The two of them go at it. The other guy gets stabbed several times. He staggers out into the sidewalk and dies. He gets convicted of manslaughter, 18 months sentence down at Deer Lodge, and to make the long story short, he ends up dying of the Spanish flu. And so that's the end of my grandfather, leaving my grandmother a widow. She had to go to work as a waitress at a $35 mortgage, 4 young kids, and the story to tie it together. She went to work as a waitress. Before too long, she ends up being the president and the walking delegate of the Women's Protective Union. And that's one of the many stories of Butte and the Women's Protective Union and my grandma. Thanks for coming, sir. So, dealing with life's challenges, I'll tell you about what happened. My father was born in 1910, so he's 7 or 8 when his father died. He was immediately put to work running an elevator. So he's 7 or 8 years old, he's running an elevator down south. I'm trying to cut through part of this. When I was in the 7th grade, my dad was first diagnosed with tuberculosis. He ended up going to Galen, the TB sanitarium, for a while. Then he was diagnosed with silicosis. He never worked again in his life. He was 47. I was in grade school at St. Patrick's, where Monsignor English was the pastor. I'd been an altar boy for him for 2 or 3 years. Somehow I screwed up the courage and made an appointment to see Monsignor English. By the way, the issue of doing that was that he was in charge of the cemeteries in Butte. So I went to him, I told him my dad was disabled, asked him whether it was possible to get on at the cemetery. From there, I got on. I mean, he was the boss. And so, at the Memorial Day, somehow I made my way to Holy Cross Cemetery, and I got there and was told, I'm sorry that I'm going so long. Anyway, so I got on at the cemetery. Now I want to give you a lesson on how to be a manager of workers, okay? So we got there, I got there, started learning how to clean the lawnmower, started going down the road to cut grass. Along comes this man going like a bat out of the hell in a truck. He leans out the window and he says the following: "Are you Shea?" I said, "Yes, sir. I'm Fleming, your boss." "Yes, sir." "Shea, if I catch you fucking the dog, you're gonna go walking up the hill with your bucket between your legs." That was the beginning of my work. So I got a job working there, lucked out, worked 6 summers. At the last of my work there, the last year that I worked a night shift in the graveyard. The job was to water the grass. 2 years before I did it, there was a another kid, say Jack O'Donnell, that was watering the grass. One night, there was no moon, Jack O'Donnell was walking across the grass to turn on another sprinkler. And when he was doing it, unbeknownst to me, a drunk who had been drinking at the roadhouse across the street, the one with the hitching posts, walked over to the cemetery and passed out on the grass. Jack, it's pitch black, walks across the grass, can't see the man, he steps right on his stomach. The man goes, "Ugh!" Jack ran like a bat on a hill, went all the way to the drive-in theater before he stopped, and what made it difficult is that he had pooped his pants. Those are the memories that people remember. It was a great job. We belonged to a union and it was great work. Thank you, sir. Now, this is another interview with a woman. I know you're running out of gas. I think I'll just go. This is good. Here, I just figured this out. This is being taped. It's going to be on the YouTube channel, and you can read the rest of it. There is something I want.
You can keep going, it's all right.
Pardon me?
You can keep going.
Yeah, I'm kind of running out of gas myself. This is an important thing in terms of history. A man named David Eamon, who's now an emeritus faculty member. The Irish surnames listed most frequently were O'Sullivan, Murphy, Harrington, O'Shea, and Lynch. A total of 1,200 Sullivans, 275 Murphys, 200 Harringtons, 100 Sheas, and nearly 100 Lynches. There were 77 different Sullivan families from Castletown, Bear, etc., etc., etc. One of the families was the family of a man whose name is Gerald Harrington, who became an important member of the dentistry faculty at University of Washington. Now, I think you can see these pictures. So my Italian grandparents the last name is Mattioli, and they lived in McQueen on Leatherwood Street. There's a picture in the upper left of well, let me just back up. As a child, we called my Irish grandmother Nana. We called my Italian grandmother Nona. Later on, I found out her name was Nina. So I had a Nona and a Nana whose name was Nina. A woman named Beth Judy wrote a book called Beth, Bold Women in Montana History, and in it, she talks about my grandmother. Again, the importance of her work in the Women's Protective Union. And here's an interesting story. In the 1940s, my father and my uncle Emmett had got work in Reno, Nevada, in a gambling club called the Nevada Club. The job long and short of it is that my dad and Emmett ended up quitting the job, and that night, what happened was that the boss, Fitzgerald, there was an attempted assassination, and he was paralyzed. He didn't die.
Yeah, it's all
I'll talk to you later. All right, now this is you'll enjoy this, I hope. This is a picture on our last trip to Ireland in '22. A gravestone that only Sarsfield O Sullivan would have erected in memory of his O'Sullivan clan. The stone rests in the graveyard of the ruins of the old Catherine Church. Nancy Everett, my wife, is the woman on the right above. She's with Mrs. Sullivan, the owner of our B&B. Mrs. Sullivan was a wonderful woman, and she drove us all the way out to the end of the tip of Valera, and so we could photograph. Nancy took the photograph of this tombstone. Now, there was a man here a while ago whose grandmother was related to Sean O'Sullivan's wife. The key is that of all the O'Sullivans, a few belong to a clan that's called Bawn, B-A-W-N, and so I'm a member of that clan. Oopsie. So I'm a member of that clan, and I happen to meet some people.
Thank you.
Thank you. I met some people in St. Louis who were also members of the Bawn clan, and we actually have had lunch with these folks. Oh my God, I'm sorry for keeping you so long.
No, it was amazing.
Well, that's
May
fun.
the Lord be with you and with your spirit.
Thank you.